So this webinar is going to be about some advanced filleting options that you can have and that you can use. My name is Dan Lawrence. I am an application engineer at DesignPoint here. And the fillet tool is super commonly used, but there's so many little options that a lot of people just don't know about. And hopefully that this webinar can show them to you and you guys can start using them in your everyday modeling. So before we jump into a bunch of examples, I am going to, wanting to point out this webinar is going to be recorded. So I'll be answering all of the questions at the end and addressing those towards the end. So before we jump into our examples, right, let's understand how fillets work and what options you're going to be seeing in your fillet property manager once you launch the fillet tool. So the first thing you're going to be prompted to do is select a fillet type. There's 4 different types of fillets that you can add, and the most commonly used one is going to be your constant size fillet. And naturally, since it's the most common and the default option and default fillet type when you launch the tool, it's also going to be and have the most versatile options that are available to you and customization that you can do with it. So for most of this webinar, we're going to be talking about the constant size fillet options. A lot of those options are going to be also applicable to our variable size fillet types. And what a variable size fillet type is it's essentially the opposite of a constant size, and it varies. Rather, it's not constant. As it goes along its edge, right, you can vary. We're not going to do an example of a variable size fillet. There's no that some of the options that we're going to be using with constant size are also applicable to our variable size. Face fillet is what we're going to end with. Some different and neat options that are unique specifically to the face fillet. And I just think the face fillet's underused, and not a lot of people know what it's capable of. Full round, everyone should know what a full round fillet is, but if you don't, it's probably one of the most simplistic fillet types, right? You only have one option, and it's going to smooth out 3 faces connecting to each other with a nice tangent surface. So those are our fillet types. Once we define our fillet types, we're going to have our fillet methods, right? That's another 4 options here. So your fillets can be symmetric or asymmetric, and essentially that's going to be, if you're asymmetric, it's going to have this elliptical profile kind of look. Symmetric is going to be what you'd expect, right, the default option. And these two you probably, on the right here, chord width and hold line, you've probably never seen if you don't work with face fillets, because they are unique to the face fillet type. And I'll have an example that shows both and how they're used. So that's your fillet methods, which brings us to our fillet profiles. I'm not going to go too much into our fillet profiles. I just wanted to include this to show that there are different types of profiles that you can choose from, and that's going to set the curvature of your fillet as it's going from one face to the next. You can see the curvature combs on each of these fillets right here on the edge, kind of showing and displaying that. So with all that out of the way, let's kind of just dive into some of our examples. For unique filleting options, that's pretty much what this webinar is going to be focusing on. There's a lot for constant size, and I'm going to have an example of all of these, hopefully, and show you how to use each option and where you might want to use it. The ones with the asterisk are the ones I mentioned that are also going to be applicable to a variable size fillet, but for the most part, these options are unique to your constant size fillets. So we're going to have an examples of all of these, and then we're going to end with some examples of face fillet options, right? We're going to have face fillet, show how to use that, one of the awesome features that is capable of, and we'll also show chord width and hold line options and how to use those and examples of both. So let's just jump into SOLIDWORKS with that out of the way. Oops. And let's open up our first example. So I have a lot of examples prepared. Hopefully we will get to all of them, but we might not, and so that's okay. I saved the important ones for the beginning. So let's start with our setback fillet example. This is also going to combine two options in one. So we have this intersection in this part right here, and we want to add all of our fillets to it. We have specific radii that we want to add to each of these edges. Down at the bottom, we want this edge and this edge to be 10 millimeter radius. We want this edge and this edge to also be 10, but we want these sides to be 5 millimeters and this one in the middle to be a little bit larger and have a 15 millimeter radius. Now, one of the cool things that you can do with a constant size fillet, if all of those fillets are constant, or are of this constant size type, you don't have to split them up, right? Most of the time, if you have a more than one radius fillet, you're gonna have to split it up into multiple different radii or multiple different fillets. But with constant size, you can actually do it all within one tool and one feature just by checking on the checkbox. So if I go to this first example right here, let's kind of roll it back. I added all of those fillets right here in one feature. Right? So if I go and edit this feature, notice all the flags that are coming out from each edge, right? And they all have a different radius applied to it. So if I go down here to where I would set those in the fillet parameters, there's a little checkbox that's, again, unique to constant size fillets. And with this, I can check that on, and now I have control of each edge's radius, and able to set each edge to its own radius. And it looks pretty good. And for the most part, it solves and it works. A couple things that I might want to address, right? As I look down here, these fillets aren't really blending into each other, and same thing right here. Most applications, that is okay. But another thing I noticed is as I rotate my model, because of all of the variance up here at that really complicated 5 edge intersection, it caused this little like nose right here, and I don't want that. One technique that you can use to try and clean that up is kind of going towards or diving into surface modeling a little bit, is delete face. The delete face command is awesome for cleaning up fillets. We're going to be using it a lot throughout this lesson or this webinar. But I'm going to be able to delete all of these faces that I don't want and make it all just one nice smooth face. And a lot of times that'll smooth out your fillets. But I notice I still have that nose, and I don't want that. I want it to kind of smooth out like that. So options right now are I can remodel it or try something different, or I can use another constant size specific feature or option, and that's going to be our setback parameters. So let's go to our setback one. Again, I'm going to move back up here. So if I edit this feature, right now it looks exactly as it did just before, right? All the radii are the same. They have the flags. Again, I'm using the multi-radius fillet to add those different radii, but it looks different. And the reason it looks different is because as I go down here, I added some setback parameters. And what is a setback parameter? So one thing you're going to need to know is you can only use these parameters on vertices where 3 or more edges meet. In our case, we have 2 cases where that happens. So down here we have 3, and up here we have 5 edges meeting all at one vertice. And what you're going to be able to do is tell SOLIDWORKS, like, hey, where you normally blend those fillets together, I want to set that back a certain amount of or a certain distance. So notice when I hit this vertex, right, I choose this top one right here, I can see this new flag pop up that shows up, and I have more arrows and lines going towards my edges. It's getting real busy and real confusing, but it's really not. So as I zoom in here, these setbacks, each line is going to all the edges that are connecting to this vertex or this vertex right here. And what the distance is, it's saying, hey, I want you to start blending, instead of where it normally does, 25 millimeters back from there. Same thing up here. This one I want to do 25 back, 35 back, 25 back, or 20 back. And that's what it's doing, right? You can change these numbers just by double clicking. I can say, hey, I want this to be 15, right? And to make it nice and pretty and symmetrical, I will make this side also 15. That's all that's doing. So once I set those, I can choose the second vertex, and now I see the flag down here, and I could change those accordingly. And what this does, when I click OK, is it starts blending those fillets earlier. But it also, if you notice, it takes, right, because it started earlier, it also removed that nose. And then I could use the delete face with the tangent fill to smoothen out that corner. So that's a pretty neat tool that not a lot of people use or know about, setback. And let me show another example of where I actually used this when I was just modeling something for fun. I made this die when I was teaching essentials course. It's because I was playing around with the patterning. So I just made a basic extrude, and I copied the cut it revolve that was there, and then I was playing around with sketch patterns to see how that worked. So then I patterned that onto there, and I put that onto all of the faces, and then I deleted the ones I didn't want, and I got this TP die. But this isn't about modeling, right? This is going to be about our fillets. So I want to curve these edges, so I added, my first instinct is to just try a normal fillet, and this looks pretty good, right? The corners come in, right? I don't really need to change it, but I wanted to see if I can make it look even that much more realistic. And again, if I just edit this feature, it's just a constant 1 millimeter radius around the entire part. Now let's look at our setback fillet. Right, just by adding a setback, it makes it look even that much more realistic. And if I edit this feature, right, I just set it back 2 millimeters, I believe, for every vertex. And then I cleaned it up with a little bit of a delete face, so it doesn't have those edges that it normally creates. Right, it cleaned it up with the delete face tangent fill. So that's our setback fill. Pretty neat feature. Let's keep going. So I actually got time to hit every example. Moving on to our next one, let's take a look at keep feature. Now this one I'm just going to do a quick show of how it works, right? Because they're pretty easy to use once you know that. The first one we're going to look at is the keep feature option that's available to you with, again, constant size fillets only. Actually, yeah, constant size only. So notice this fillet as it's going over this extrude, right? It's completely encasing it, but I still have the feature, right? It didn't affect the feature, and that's because I have, by default, this option down here selected, keep feature, right? In my fillet options, I have keep features selected. If I were to unselect that, right, notice the preview goes away right here, and if I actually hit OK, it eats up the extrude. So it's one of the neat things that you have available to you with constant size fillets. You have the option to not keep your features as they are, without having to worry about your fillets completely encapsulating them. Now the other option is round corners. Right now I added a fillet to all 4 of these edges, and it has these pretty sharp corners right here. You also have the option to round those off just by checking off the checkbox at the bottom to round corners. It changes it from a square to this nice curved shape around this little extrude right there, and it curves out those edges and corners. So that's keep feature. Again, pretty self-explanatory once you know that they exist, right? Round the corners and keep feature. So let's open up our next example. So our next example is going to actually be about a pretty cool one, and probably a common one that you might have seen. So I'm actually just gonna roll this back up to here. We have this part, right now it's just a cylinder inside of a block. Nothing much, but the point of this is we're gonna look at this fillet right here, right? And specifically, we wanna add a 10mm fillet to this edge, but we also wanna keep this edge right here. We want this edge to stay straight. We don't wanna move it at all. So let's kind of see what happens when we add a fillet to this edge, right? Because right now it's going all the way over here. There's no way you can add 10mm here. So let's see how SOLIDWORKS handles that. There's 2 ways that it can do it. So let's open up our overflow. Now, by default, your fillet is going to, this is what your fillet's going to look like. And what's happening is, as this fillet comes around this edge, right, it gets to a point specifically right here, which we'll come back into, right, where it can't go anymore, and SOLIDWORKS needs to figure out a way to do and handle that. So what it does is it's saying, all right, let's keep this surface as it is, and let's move the surrounding edges accordingly. You can actually change how it does that. So if I edit my feature, I go down all the way down to the bottom to overflow type, right? Right now it's on default as it was on keep surface, which is actually the default overflow type, right? And again, what it's doing is it's keeping the surface of the fillet as one face, and it's not breaking it up, and it's saying, all right, let's take the surrounding edges and move those to accommodate for that, right? But if I hit keep edge, it's saying, hey, I don't want to mess with any of the surrounding geometry. I don't want to mess with any of those edges. You can do what you want with the face. So let's see what this looks like. And for the most part, that solves my issue, right? That acts how I want it to look. I want it to keep this edge straight as it goes off into the tangency right there. But there is an issue here with, and there's a reason why SOLIDWORKS didn't default to that. Which kind of goes into surface modeling a little bit, but which I'm not going to go too much into, but I will show you why it doesn't default to this option. So there's a tool called face curves right up here. If you just type in face in your command search, it'll show up here. And what this allows you to do, allows you to select a face or a surface and see how SOLIDWORKS is parameterizing that in the background and calculating that. So if I select this face, I see those lines, right? I see the curves that create that face. And this one looks fine. This one looks great. Every line and every curve has its own distinct edge and its own distinct point that it's going to. But if I look at this other face that we created now, I hit that, you notice how the horizontal ones are now all going towards one point. Right? This is what we call a degenerate surface, and you want to avoid degenerate surfaces most of the time, because it can cause errors down the road when you're editing or modeling your part. So that's why SOLIDWORKS doesn't default to this. So let's address that, right? I still want this result, but let's see if we can do some surface trimming and fixing up in this area to make that a not degenerate surface. So another thing to point out is, it's pretty interesting, is if you look at the face curves of here, it lines up all the way with this edge, which I thought was pretty interesting, right? Where that edge splits, right at this intersection, is where it goes into the next surface. I just thought that was a neat little fact. But let's look at how to address that. Now you can address this using surface modeling techniques, which is kind of what we're going to do, but there's actually an option inside of the constant size fillet that you have that came out in 2019, and not a lot of people know it exists. So I believe it was 2019, it might have been 2018, but it's a relatively new feature, and that is the partial edge parameters. And even if you look for examples of using this with a fillet, all the examples I found online are with chamfer. So this is a neat application that you can use this partial edge parameters in your everyday modeling to get what you want. So I'm going to change to that over here, which just suppresses this. So I drew this sketch. It's not necessary to use the feature. It's just going to help us out. And let me just show what the sketch is. So I knew that as this edge comes around, as that fillet comes around, it messes up right at this intersection. And I know that I want to add a constant size, circular profile, symmetric fillet that is 10 millimeters in radius. So that edge that it's going to create is just going to be 10 millimeters offset from this edge. And I found the point that it's going to intersect. Not necessary to use this tool, but it's going to help us, and I'll show you why. So let's exit that sketch. Zoom out, zoom in a little bit, and now let's go to our fillet. So notice how the fillet stops there. How did I get it to do that? So let's open up our fillet feature and look at what's happening. So again, I'm still using a symmetric fillet, constant size type, 10 millimeter radius, circular profile. We're not using setback in this example, but there's this other parameters option right underneath setback parameters called partial edge parameters. And if I expand that, what this is allowing me to do is add a fillet on partial, on not the whole, right, not entire, partial edge, right? You can say, I only want to use this much of the edge, and it adds that fillet and it stops it right there. So my start condition, right, if I had, you can see it's purple, that's starting over there. I don't want to mess with that, so I'm going to keep it as none. And for my end condition, I'm saying, hey, stop this fillet. You can give it a distance. That's going to be a distance from the end of the edge. You can give it a percentage, but I found it easier to just use a reference, and I used the reference sketch that I created. So, right, it stops that fillet right here. And now what this is going to allow me to do, it's going to allow me to make easy patches to this area and fix up this area with some surface modeling. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the surface modeling, but these techniques are pretty easy to use, even if you've never done surfacing before. So the first thing that you would need to do is make those faces selectable. So I just drew on this plane 2 lines and then projected it onto this face, which then made that face selectable. And I did the same thing down here because it didn't quite reach the edge. Right after that, right, then I could use my delete face command, and which is an easy, right, our go-to for fixing up fillet areas that aren't working. But in this special case, right, you're not going to be able to use the tangent fill. Right, it'll probably yell at me. Yeah, it says it can't be made, and that's because of right down here. It's trying to make this face tangent to the surface and this face tangent to the surface, and that's just not possible at that point. So you're going to need to use another method. So the way that delete face and fill does is it deletes the faces like we just did, and it just adds a filled surface tangent on every edge. And knowing how that works, right, we can just delete the face and manually add our filled surface, which is what we do here. But specifically, right, we want to apply tangent to all edges, but we don't want it to be tangent on this edge right there. So if I select that edge again and change that to contact, this will now work nice and fine. And I could hit OK. I could then knit and thicken, and now we have our nice blended area right there, keeping that edge. And if we check our face curves again, right, this is not a degenerate surface no more. So it's a neat little tool and an option that you have available to you. So I believe, let's keep going. I have a couple more examples. That's it for constant size though. So we're gonna move on to our face fillets. So let's open up our face fillet example. Let's open it up. I made this part strictly to show some of the examples, right? And show how the tools work. There's no point, I just did some random stuff to it. And we're gonna kind of explore what face fillet, how to use face fillet, what the benefits of using it are, and some of the options that you have available to you. So let's jump into our first one right here, and that's just using the face fillet and taking advantage of the features you have available and its options, its capabilities. So if I hit fillet, right, just like every other one, you got to choose your type. But in this case, we're not going to use a constant size fillet. We're going to use a face fillet. And what I'm going to be able to do from here is, it works just like the full round fillet. You're going to choose from one face to the next face, and I'm going to want to fillet from here to this face and see what can happen. And obviously it's not going to work, right? And the reason why it's not working is because its radius is too small. So that's one of the things you'll find with regular old constant size fillets. You won't see a preview because your radius is too large. With face fillets, odds are your radius is too small and you have to bump it up. So let's see what happens when we bump this up to 50. Right? I now see a preview, and what's happening is it's taking this face and it's going to fillet it all the way 50 millimeters, so it got past that edge, and so now it's hitting this face, and all the material on the inside is going to fill in this area and get rid of everything up here, and it's going to make this nice symmetric fillet. So if I go to our face fillet, it's exactly what it looks like. So that's one of the benefits. I have another example of where that came up in my, when I was modeling something, and I'll show that after this. It's what those handouts that you guys might should have access to. And if you don't, I will still show them as well. So let me go back to here. All right. So that's what the face fillet is. It's pretty awesome. Another option, right, some of those unique options that you had available to you with the face fillet is, I mentioned, are the different methods. So you can use a hold line or a constant chord width. And what do those do, and what does that mean? So let me try to add a fillet from here to here. Let's add a regular old face fillet from this face to this face. Now, right now, since it's just two faces, it looks pretty much like a normal constant size fillet would. And that's what I'd expect because it's at a 90-degree angle. And as I just bump up this up here, right, again, it's still just adding those constant size across, but it doesn't take into account this face, the faces down here. So if I hit OK, right, kind of got this messy thing, and it actually doesn't look at all how I want it to look. I don't want it to be curved. I want it to kind of have a nice natural curvature to it. So one thing you can do is you can actually use hold line. So I pre-drew these. They're just regular old splines, and I then use split line to put them onto each face. But right, let's see what it looks like when we use those as our hold lines. Let's actually edit the feature. So, right, I'm the same items to fillet. I'm going from one face to the next, except down here in fillet parameters and fillet method, I chose hold line instead of symmetric. And for this, right, if I choose one, I don't see a preview because I'm on curvature continuous, but if I did circular, I should see a preview. Maybe not. Maybe if I do it with this one. Yeah. Notice how I see the resulting fillet kind of keeps the curvature, right, even this way, of my hold line. And I can actually add more than one hold line to my fillet. So in this case, we're going to have two hold lines, and I want to say, hey, I want this fillet to go from this edge to this edge. And in order to do that, you can't do that with a circular because they are just wouldn't work. So you're going to have to keep your curvature continuous, and then you have your fillet. So that's a pretty neat feature that not a lot of people know exists. You can do the same thing. A lot of common example is if you just have a cylinder coming out from a planar face, you can project kind of how you want the profile to look and use that as your hold line. Common example. And then now let's look at constant chord width. Let's look at constant size first to compare. So you kind of saw it before right there, but I want to fillet this little pocket right here, and I want it to all have all have the same radius, right, and all kind of look the same. So my first instinct is to just go and add a constant size radius, all with the same radius to all of those corners. But because of how they are, how they look, right, this is an obtuse angle versus this is an acute angle, how SOLIDWORKS is going to have to calculate that is it's going to add a smaller fillet it's going to look smaller here, and it's going to look larger here. So if I go down, roll to the end, I can see that, right? My fillet 7, smaller and larger. Like they have the same radius, but they look smaller, and that's not what I want. I want them to look the same. So one thing I can use is I can use a face fillet with a constant chord width applied as the method. So if I go down to chord width, notice how it changes, right? The chord width is calculating, rather the radius, it's calculating the distance between this face and this face, and that's always going to be whatever you set. So I set it to be 7 millimeters, and all of the fillets follow that. The only downside to using that method is, or using face fillets in general, is you have to add them one at a time. So if I go, right, I have to add them to all 4 corners one at a time, and that's one of the drawbacks to it. But if you need to get it to look how you want it to look, that's something you can do. All right, so that's going to bring us to our next example, right, which is where I actually used a face fillet when I was modeling. So let's actually open this up. And this is for this year's 2020 Model Mania. If you don't know what Model Mania is, it is a competition held at 3D Experience World, previously known as SOLIDWORKS World. And it's a way for you to, it's a competition to see who can model something the fastest. So they give you a drawing, such as that one, which isn't, let's see if I can bring it over. There we go. They gave you a drawing such as this one, where you have to model it, and then they give you changes, and the face fillet came about during the changes. So I'll leave this up here in case you guys can't download those handouts. I'll leave this up for a second. You can take a screenshot if you want. But then let's open up how I modeled it. Right, again, I'm not going to focus on the modeling. Where are you? There you are. On the modeling aspect too much, but it's fun to see how I modeled it. So let's go up here and then start from the beginning. This is our phase one. So I started from an extrude right in the middle. That was the most obvious thing for me to find. And then the next thing I modeled was the little, this geometry right here. And what I did might not have, it's actually over there. You might not have done the same thing. It's just what I thought of first is I took this geometry and I made it up to this surface as a multi-bodied part. And the reason I did that is so that I can add the cut specifically one to this body and also not have to worry about this because that'll get cleaned up when I do the end and I clean it up with an intersect. But I added the cut that was given, right, the angle here with a revolved cut. I just drew a line and revolved it around. And then I wanted to go ahead and add the hole. First idea was to put a plane. The hole has to be 4 millimeters from the bottom. I put a plane there and I tried to add my hole. Didn't work. I ended up adding my counterbore to this face and then adjusted the profile to the dimensions I needed. And then I patterned it and I intersected it and I added the fillets. So that's how I modeled this part. It was pretty fun. But right, again, it's not about the modeling, it's about phase two. So let me bring up phase two PDF right now as it comes up. Phase two asked me to minimize, right? So you have to make this 8 degrees instead of 22. So that angle is changing. I also had it a shell and this radius is now 30. And that's where we're gonna actually run into the issues. So phase two, after the changes, looks like this, right? Oops. Looks like this. And you're left with this kind of crappy area right here. And in order to accommodate that, with a normal fillet, it would be kind of annoying. And without a face fillet, you'd probably have to actually model the fillet into it. I don't really know of another way to get a 30 millimeter fillet right there. So, but right, thankfully there is face fillet. So what face fillet allows is for you to just do from, right, if I just edit this feature, a fillet from this face all the way over to this face, and it just eats up that area and adds all the area in, fills it in for me, and I don't have to worry about it, right? I went from this face to that face. And again, 3 times because you can only use the face fillet, add 1 face fillet per time. And then that's it. So I did have another example, but it looks like we're running out of time, and that example is a little bit complicated. Let me show it real quick, just the idea of it, because it is pretty neat. It's kind of related to our original partial edge idea of stopping our fillets early, but sometimes it's not so easy to do with the partial edge, especially if you have an intersection kind of like this. In order to add these fillets, right, if I were to add a fillet and say this edge right here, it'll actually tell me that it is, right, it doesn't load, and if I hit OK, it'll say, hey, it's too complex. So this is a pretty annoying fillet to add. In order to add it with constant size, you'd have to choose, it's very order dependent, so regular old fillets, and that will look something like this, right? But this area, again, is not the cleanest, and it's not really what I want. So there's some other methods you can take. Partial edge will be a little bit annoying because you have to draw a sketch every time, or not every time, but you have to do each individually. And this area you won't really get. It'll be pretty difficult to get that there using partial edge. So there's an easier way to do it, and it does this. It gets the exact same result, and that's by using what I call the block method. So the block method is you literally just extrude a block and have it stop where you want and be the correct sizes to where you want your fillets to stop. And then you could add your fillets in any order you want. It'll stop at that fillet. You can use your split line to make that face specifically selectable. You can delete that block out and you're left with this area here. And to patch that up, you're going to need to use some surface modeling techniques more than just the tangent or filled surface. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to show the patch. and that's pretty much it. So that's all I have for you guys today with advanced fillets. If you guys have any questions, just please ask them now, either in the chat or in the questions dialog box. All right, it doesn't look like there are any questions. So thank you guys for listening, and have an awesome day. Oop. Looks like someone does have a question. Just says help. Oh yeah, someone asked if I'm gonna make the models available. I can do that. Yeah, I can send those along to everyone who's registered. So if it doesn't fit in a zip file and it's not emailable, I will make a Dropbox link for them. But yeah, if you guys want to see those models that I worked on, I can email those out to you. I'll just email them to all the registrants, and so everyone should get that. And again, this was recorded, so if you want to go back and watch some of the techniques I did, the recording should be sent out in a few days, so sometime next week. And all of our webinars are recorded, so at the end of each month, those are posted onto our YouTube page that you guys will be able to access through the link that we send out each month. So you'll be able to see all of our webinars on a monthly basis, but if you register for them, you'll get them emailed to you directly. All right. If that is it, thanks again for listening, and hopefully you guys learned something.